The Ruin DLC has finally been released, and it's incredible. The visuals and atmosphere of the destroyed Pizzaplex are amazing, and the horror we always requested is finally here. But the biggest part of Ruin no one expected after Security Breach was the emotion the story held. And with millions of people having seen and played it now, it's time to ask, what actually makes Ruin such a perfect sequel? As we've already covered, the emotion in Ruin immediately sets it apart from anything else Steelwool could have released, and that's not just from the story, but also the design. Just the opening itself tells us so much about the gap between Security Breach and Ruin in a creative way. The ambient particles you may not have even noticed gives the feel of a dusty ruin, and the sound of water running beneath the foundations gives us this feeling too. This is a huge jump from what Security Breach used for exposition. Even little changes like this bot with Roxy Raceway painted on it was a fun way to tell players where they're heading instead of just a massive sign. And it wasn't just the opening lobby that had such details. Monty Golf had mist to make the catwalks feel so high up. In Roxy Raceway, the open roof shows how damaged the Pizzaplex really is, and the wrecking ball being there is just a small added detail to keep the story going. And another incredible detail I only just noticed while editing this is the echo actually takes longer when entering this massive room. Which are small details you may not notice, but they can change the entire mood of the game. And with Security Breach lacking these smaller details, I think that's what made it feel so incomplete. Well, that and the bugs. And while there were players who didn't enjoy the Ruin DLC, I couldn't find a single bad review about the atmosphere Steelwool had created in it. Another highly anticipated part of Ruin was, of course, the animatronics. Their destruction in Security Breach was pretty brutal, and a lot of players felt it was unfair to end their characters so soon, especially with none of the endings sparing the animatronics. Ruin immediately lived up to those hopes, giving each of the animatronics more time on screen. According to game files, there was also intended for a saviour ending, where all the animatronics would be repaired, but my guess is Steelwool ran out of time, and we will have to wait for a future DLC for that. But going back to Ruin, Roxanne took the spotlight for this DLC. There was already a lot of interest in Roxanne Wolf after Security Breach having the most developed character, and Steelwool perfectly built on this in Ruin. Instead of choosing the simple option of just letting us fix her, which we theorised in a few videos, Steelwool gave us a tragic story between Cassie and Roxanne, making Ruin feel less 2D and making both characters' stories far deeper than Gregory and Freddy in Security Breach. When talking about animatronics, we also have to mention Bonnie, of course. Bonnie being added in the way he was very surprising, well, to me at least. I thought he would either play a big role or not appear at all. But seeing him as an Easter egg worked really well. Seeing Bonnie answered a lot of questions, like who destroyed him and how, but also gave way to more questions, like why he's in Bonnie Bowl instead of Gator Golf where he was last seen, which is exactly how most FNAF games are structured. And rounding up the animatronics, we have Freddy, or Prototype Freddy. His reveal as a villain didn't come as much surprise, as it was something I did predict before, but while I think he will return, I feel he won't be friendly. And while Prototype Freddy wasn't given very much time on screen, I do like that Steelwool included him. It gave us another mystery to theorise about and made for a really cool enemy, even if it was only a small part. By removing Freddy, it also made it so the player was on their own, leading to a more horror-oriented game. That was another popular request from the community, and while Ruin won't win any awards for its horror, it definitely won up Security Breach's horror, and delivered on what players wanted. To be fair, I didn't feel nearly as comfortable playing Ruin as I did in Security Breach, which I mentioned a few times while streaming. Oh, I don't like this. In the vents in Security Breach, it wasn't that scary, because I do not feel one bit safe in these vents. And this is where Ruin worked really well as a sequel. Security Breach had some scary parts, but was mostly designed to be open world. Ruin doubled down on what the community wanted, and made Ruin much scarier. But it wasn't perfect. Ruin wasn't that scary, and there were times when it could be better, like when the rabbit chases you through the daycare. Having Eclipse hunting you instead would have been way scarier. But that is the main point with Ruin. It isn't a perfect game. It was made for free as an addition to Security Breach, and still managed to create a really strong story. So let's take a look at what Ruin developed on its own. Security Breach was all about stretching the boundaries of what Five Nights at Freddy's could be, and I think it did this really well. Steelwool tried this again in Ruin with the new Vanny mask and augmented reality, and in just a few releases, FNAF went from this to this. And while this new aspect of Ruin is a really cool addition, going through the server rooms didn't really feel like FNAF anymore. But I feel like this idea was just Steelable testing the waters with their own story, and didn't make Ruin completely reliant on this new gameplay. The Vanny Mask also was a really fun feature, especially with including 2 whole separate maps just for it to be used. And while it did get a bit repetitive after a while, the fun of looking around for Easter eggs with it made up for it. What wasn't repetitive in Ruin was travelling between chapters. This was a huge problem in Security Breach, being called Walking Simulator, and for good reason. With such a large map and limited parts to the story, Security Breach relied on travelling a lot, which got really boring. This was my biggest problem with Security Breach, but it was completely turned around in Ruin. I'd actually say it's one of Ruin's strongest points. Travelling from one location to another was super clean and made the game so much more fun. It was of course made easier by the Pizzaplex being destroyed and letting you travel via ladders, but even though this game had a very set path unlike Security Breach, not having to extend the game's runtime really benefited Ruin, and kept the game engaging throughout the entire thing. The actual story of Ruin was another strong point in my opinion. As we've already covered with Bonnie and the other animatronics, Ruin had a really good balance of new and old. The biggest reveal, apart from Bonnie's body, was the Princess Quest sword, implying Princess Quest was the correct ending to Security Breach, confirming one of the biggest mysteries of the game. But Ruin didn't just solve questions from Security Breach, it created a lot of its own, mainly based around the Mimic. The Mimic's full reveal at the end of Ruin immediately began a whole wave of theorising, something we will definitely be covering next week. Having this new character with a mysterious backstory and awesome abilities taking the place of William Afton as the main antagonist of FNAF is personally a massive step in the right direction. This finally moves the story on from the original story to what Steelable wants to tell, while still having close links to the original games with Easter eggs and recurring characters. But Ruin only showed a small part of the full story being told between the Mimic, Roxanne, Gregory and Cassie, and it's only just beginning. And to be honest, I have really high hopes for what's to come, with such an amazing start with Ruin. When downloading the game, I was told it was beyond any expectation I could have, and while I enjoyed Security Breach, I was hesitant to believe that. But after loads of surprises, Easter eggs and theorising with you guys on stream, I can honestly say that Ruin was a massive step up from Security Breach in almost every way. And just glossing over those amazing parts, the thing that made me make this video was the attention to detail in audio and visuals that Steel will put into every environment in the game. And in only about 3 hours of playtime, Steel will also gave us so many environments and places to explore, and all for free, so a massive thank you to Steelable. Let me know what your favourite part of Ruin was down below. With so many things to cover, I might have missed it, and subscribe for the theory video next week. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching.